Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Okay, let's just dive right into this because we are unpacking one of history's absolute most fascinating studies of unconventional warfare, right? It's about overcoming severe self-doubt and trusting a higher power way, way more than sheer numbers. We're looking at the story of Gideon. It's an ancient underdog narrative that honestly completely flips the script on what it takes to be a leader and achieve victory. If you've ever felt, wildly unqualified for a task sitting right in front of you, yeah, this is the explainer for you.
I mean, think about this for a second. How on earth do 300 men take down a massive, sprawling military force without even drawing a weapon? It's a wildly compelling question, and honestly, it serves as the life or death hook for today's entire narrative. But to understand how we get to this literally impossible victory, we first have to understand the absolute gut-wrenching desperation of the world Gideon was living in.
So, Section 1, 7 Years of Fear, the Midianite Oppression.
To set the stage here, the tension in ancient Israel was at an absolute breaking point. For 7 long, agonizing years, the people lived under constant terror. Every single year, enemy raiders known as the Midianites swept into the land. But why were they attacking? Well, they weren't interested in conquering territory or like casual skirmishes. They were purely opportunistic raiders. They perfectly timed their attacks with the harvest, coming in like this massive swarm of locusts, specifically to exploit Israel's resources, totally strip the land bare, and steal absolutely everything of economic value.
And this brutally aggressive economic drain?
It perfectly illustrates the sheer desperation of the Israelites. I mean, the Midianites destroyed crops and stole livestock, to the point where families were literally driven from their homes. They were forced to live as refugees in their own land, hiding out in dark mountain caves. You can imagine the psychological toll of this, right? Starving, terrified, constantly looking over your shoulder. It was in this utter, wide-scale panic that the people finally cried out to God for a deliverer. Which brings us to Section 2, the reluctant warrior, finding a deliverer in a winepress. Now, we shift from this wide view of national panic down to a very specific, quiet, and honestly pretty fearful scene to meet the man called to fix all of this, our anti-hero. There's this stark, almost funny contrast between Gideon's terrified reality and the divine call he receives. Gideon is not a soldier. He's a farmer, and he's so terrified of the Midianites that he's actually threshing his wheat down inside a sunken winepress just to hide his meager food supply. And yet, an angel of the Lord appears to this cowering man and greets him with, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon's response is so incredibly relatable. He essentially says, are you talking to me? He immediately points out his complete lack of qualifications. His clan is the weakest, and he is the absolute bottom of the ladder in his own family. But this is a totally crucial takeaway for us. God chose Gideon despite his intense self-doubt, right? Not because he was already some strong, confident, chest-thumping leader.
All right, Section 3, Testing the Divine Call, the Fleece and the Altar.
So, before you go off to lead a nation's army, you kind of want proof that you aren't just hearing things, right? Gideon needed absolute confirmation, so he asks for a sign using a sheep's fleece. Night 1, he asks for the fleece to be wet with dew, but the ground around it dry. In the morning, sure enough, he wrings a whole bowl of water out of it, but he's still doubting. So he says, actually, scratch that. Let's do the exact opposite the next night. A dry fleece on soaking wet ground. And wow, it happens again. What you really should take away from this is how patiently his doubt is met with exact answers rather than punishment.
Empowered by this, God gives Gideon his first real test, a highly perilous act of leadership right at his own home. Under the total cover of darkness, Gideon tears down his own father's stone altar to the false god Baal. By dawn, the villagers are this furious mob ready to literally kill Gideon. But his father, Joash, brilliantly steps in and says, "Look, if Baal is a god, let him defend himself." Because of this incredibly brave stand, Gideon earns the new name Jerubbaal, which literally means "let Baal contend."
Moving on to Section 4, shrinking the army, the plunge in numbers. Now that the home front is handled, it's time to finally face the Midianite threat. But God is about to intentionally create some mathematically impossible odds here. Word spreads of Gideon's brave stand, and a massive volunteer army of 32,000 Israelites gathers. Tents are stretching all the way to the horizon. It looks like they might actually have a fighting chance. But God tells Gideon, no, this is way too many.
If you win with this many people, you're going to take the credit and think you won by your own strength.
So the crucial point is how they shrink this number. Gideon stands before his massive army and says, okay, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave right now. And immediately, 22,000 men just pack up and walk away. Just imagine the absolute psychological blow to the remaining soldiers as they watch more than 2/3 of their allies disappear in a cloud of dust, leaving only 10,000 guys standing there.
But incredibly, God says there are still too many. So he gives Gideon a very, very strange test to narrow them down even further. He brings them down to a riverbank to drink. Now, the vast majority of the men just get down on their knees and put their faces right into the water, totally ignoring their surroundings. But a tiny, tiny fraction scoop the water with cupped hands, keeping their heads up, their eyes completely alert to the horizon, and those are the ones chosen. And that leaves just 300 alert men standing where tens of thousands once stood. I mean, the odds are now mathematically impossible. The tension is just palpable here. How do 300 men defeat a locust-like horde?
Let's find out in Section 5, the Night Raid, Psychological Warfare in the Dark. This brings us to the real climax of our story, where the strategy shifts entirely from physical combat to intense psychological warfare in the pitch black. Before the battle, Gideon creeps alone to the very edge of the sprawling Midianite camp. In the hushed dark, he actually overhears an enemy soldier who's terrified by a dream of a barley loaf tumbling in and totally flattening a tent. His friend interprets it, whispering in the dark, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon." Hearing the enemy's own terror, man, that gives Gideon the final surge of courage he needs. The enemy is already mentally defeated.
So he sneaks back and equips his 300 men, and their loadout is absolutely absurd. They are equipped with trumpets, empty clay jars, and torches. Do you notice what is missing there? There are absolutely 0 swords. They are literally walking into battle against an enormous, armed army carrying nothing but pottery and musical instruments. No way, right?
The strategy is chaotic, but it is brilliant. The 300 men fan out, completely encircling the sleeping Midianite camp in total darkness. They wait, spaced out all along the hills, for Gideon's specific signal. Then, all at once, they shatter the clay jars, revealing the blazing torches inside, and blow all 300 trumpets simultaneously. And with a massive, deafening roar, the 300 men shout in perfect unison, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Just imagine the absolute pandemonium in the valley below. The Midianites are jolted awake by the sound of shattered pottery, blinding light on all sides, and blaring trumpets, completely tricking them into thinking a massive force of hundreds of thousands has breached their camp. In the chaotic dark, panicked Midianites draw their swords and actually strike each other down, totally destroying themselves as they try to flee. Section 6, Peace and Legacy. The Reluctant Victor. The sun rises on a completely transformed reality. The intense, chaotic noise of the night raid gives way to the peaceful aftermath of an unbelievable victory. The remaining enemy forces are pursued and defeated, and the Israelites are just ecstatic. Grateful elders approach Gideon and essentially try to offer him a crown, practically begging him to be their king. But Gideon, the exact same man who started this journey hiding in a winepress, he firmly shakes his head. He outright refuses the power, declaring, "I will not rule over you, the Lord will rule over you." He remains so humble, recognizing exactly where that victory actually came from. Because of his obedience and this just incredible victory, Gideon successfully leads Israel into a totally new era. For 40 years, the land that was once ravaged and stripped bare every single season finally enjoyed completely undisturbed peace. We wrap up today with a final provocative thought. Not by might nor by power, but by trust. Think about your own life for a second here. How often do we think we need the biggest army, the most resources, or just flawless confidence to overcome the obstacles we face? Gideon's story completely shatters that illusion. It really leaves us to wonder, what impossible victories could we achieve if we stopped relying entirely on our own might and started moving forward with unwavering trust? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I truly hope this sparks some deep curiosity to dive even further into these incredible historical narratives. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.